We're here this morning with Oakley Police Chief Eric Christensen in Oakley. And Eric, I wonder if you could talk to us for a minute about the Knightsen fire incident and the actions of your officers on that day.
Yeah, on that day, the officers were out on patrol, and one of the things that the officers are constantly doing is looking around and seeing what's going on. And you know, that's one of the things that we teach our police officers, you know, keep your head on a swivel and always be looking around. And one of the officers saw that there was some smoke on the horizon, and all of us are much more sensitive today about the damage that can be caused by a fire and the danger that it relates to the community itself. The officer saw the smoke. He radioed that to other officers. At that time there, we actually got an update from the fire department that they were en route to the event itself. So the officers began their response. And one of these things about these events in our area is jurisdictional boundaries do matter associated to when we're writing a report or taking an incident itself. But it's those ideas of you don't worry about jurisdictional boundaries when you're going to an event that could cause someone to lose their life. So the officers responded there. The first person to arrive was actually the supervisor. The supervisor advised what he had there at the scene and asked other officers to respond. We share the radio channel with the Contra Costa Sheriff's Office, so we constantly know what they're involved in and where they're headed to. So they also get that update from us about that they were at the scene and what we had there in the event. Officers then arrived at the location. The sergeant, when he got there, said that he had heard noises coming from the rear of the building itself and thought it was actually screams from an individual. So the sergeant radioed that to the other officers. The other officers heard that information. They went to the back side of the building and actually moved one of the patrol cars near there and actually moved on foot back. When they got to the back side of the property itself, they found that there was an individual who was back there. Later turns out to be this is the individual who actually started the fire. And he was attempting to put the fire out himself. Now the fire had grown to a point that there was no way that an individual was going to be able to put this fire out. But what people have a tendency to do is once they've committed themselves to an action, is they'll remain in that action. And so this guy's going to stay and fight this fire with the belief that he's going to be able to tamp it down. The officers yelled at the individual to get out of the way because in addition to the burning vehicles and the buildings that were surrounding him, there were also a series of propane tanks that had been left outside storage in that area itself, and the officers could see that the fire was actually catching on the grass right near those tanks. The officers advised the individual to go ahead and pull back to get away from that area, that there was too much danger. He didn't do that, so the officers went forward, made contact with him, and grabbed him to pull away from the fire event. He actually began to resist them as if he was going to stay and fight the fire even though the danger that they had found. The officers were able to move him away from that site. They actually sought refuge behind a vehicle, and when they got to that position, and a third officer arrived there, and then the propane tanks began to explode. So they could hear the hissing and then actually have the explosions themselves. They were protected by cover of that vehicle, but the officers realized that that wasn't a safe place for them to be able to be at. So they moved away from the fire, dragging the individual. They actually had to drag him about 75 to 100 yards from that location, got to a fence, got him over that fence, and then actually loaded him into a police car, moved him out. Now, one of the things with the individual, he began to suffer a medical condition. And it was those ideas of he began to actually lose the ability to breathe and actually became partially unconscious as the officers were actually removing him from the scene itself. So got him in the patrol car, moved him out to the front. And what we do at these events is we establish what we call a command post. And we'll stage fire, we'll stage medical resources, we'll stage police officers there with the idea that if we need those resources that are available. Fortunately enough, fire had called in an ambulance, so there was an ambulance there at the scene itself waiting for if somebody had been injured, and that individual was provided medical care there.
Great. So how would you characterize the behavior of your officers, the actions of your officers in removing this gentleman from the scene?
One of the things for me is it's that idea of selfless service. And we ask a lot of our employees, regardless of what they're doing. And I think that sometimes that idea of selfless service, of putting the needs of the community above oneself, you see events like this occur, and you see where that they're symbolized by that activity. And the idea is this: the officers weren't necessarily concerned for their own safety, they were concerned for the safety of this individual. Concerned to the point of that they actually had to use some physical force to get him to leave because they believed the danger to him was so great by him being there that if they didn't put themselves at this position of risk, that he would in fact succumb or be killed by this event itself. So there's no doubt in my mind that the officers going back there, grabbing that individual and removing him from the scene, saved that individual's life because he was likely to remain there. And if the officers get him to a position of cover and he suffers this medical condition, he's likely to have suffered it there, gone unconscious, fallen down, and again succumbed to the fire itself.
Great. So do you plan to recognize the behavior or the actions of your officers?
Yeah, whenever we have an employee who goes above and beyond, we have a series of awards and decorations that we can recommend here in the police department. And what our policy is a supervisor will go through, write up what the employee went through and did, characterize their response to the event itself. It's then reviewed by our awards committee. Our awards committee look at a series of medals and awards that we can provide to employees. They categorize in those areas. They go through and review it to determine if not it meets our requirements for the issuance of award, and then those awards are forwarded to the city council for their review and their presentation of the award if they deem it necessary.
Great. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Chief.
Perfect, Tony. Always good to see you, my friend.